Hey, gang. I want to apologize, and I want to recognize that there was quite a lull between some of our episodes, which you guys know I can't stand. I absolutely hate it when I have a block of space like that without any word or anything of that nature. But producer Mike fell ill prior to me going away on vacation. Then I went away on vacation, had every intention of recording about 5 podcasts while I was out there in California. That didn't happen. We just never got... we just never had the time to sit down one-on-one with everybody and record. But the wedding we went to turned out to be a super spreader, and we all got back with a really rough strain of the flu. Thankfully, it wasn't COVID. However, the bride and groom got COVID, so nobody was safe at this wedding, even though we were fully outside for both the ceremony and the reception. So go figure. But I am still recovering. I'm on my 3rd medication, and we'll be going back to work next week. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, yes, we did have a gap. Life happens. Like I said, both producer Mike was out for the count, and then it was me. Even after producer Mike kind of got back to the land of the living, he then got hit with something else. You know, he has 2 young kids at home, so the influenza's flying. And both of us got hit. You see, you can hear that a little bit there in my voice. So I'm still very congested. I am exhausted all the time. It's really great. Can't wait to go back to work and deal with that. But just wanted to acknowledge, again, I do apologize for the delay, but we're back. I've got a number of great guests on the way, so stay tuned. And again, thank you so much for your continued patronage, even though you guys don't pay for this yet. So thank you. And this is Try Not to Curse. Hey gang, and welcome to... I muted myself. Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of Try Not to Curse. Oh, Mike, one of these days I'll get the intro done properly, I promise. Today I'm joined by my friend John. John and I met through our friend Dan, who you all have met on season 1 of the podcast. Dan, as you all know, has various projects. He has a couple of YouTube shows. John and I contribute on some of those shows. John has been a contributor with Dan, I don't know, pretty much since the beginning. And I've just randomly attached myself to this to these shows on occasion. So that's how John and I met. John, how are you?
I'm doing really good. Nice to finally, we were like talking about it for a while. I'm like, let's just bite the bullet. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, tomorrow? Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's
exactly.
do it.
Exactly.
Right.
Poor John is doing this like right out of bed. Like he rolled out of bed, turned the computer on, and signed in. So I appreciate
I know.
You keep late hours.
That's on me.
Well, but again, it's the nature of what you do too. Like you're up late.
Yeah,
You've got stuff going on.
Oh yeah, constantly. But
yeah.
It's also addiction to video games. Also doesn't help matters either.
Again,
don't get addicted to video games, kids.
Well, and the really funny thing is, you're in Connecticut. You and I actually were in the same room before we ever met, and didn't realize
Yes.
it. You and I had gone to see the Joker special fan preview in AMC. And then later on, that day or the next day or something, we're on the YouTube channel with Dan, and come to find out, oh yeah, I was in that theater too. We were both there at the same time. So that was kind of funny. But yeah. I've been saying this on the show forever. I can't find anybody to talk movies with. So it's so nice to get to talk to you and get to talk to Dan. Dan, I feel like doesn't go as often as you and I do, but it's really nice having someone to talk movies with. Have you always been into movies and video games and entertainment? How did all of that start? Right from childhood?
Oh yeah, definitely from childhood. My parents adore movies more than I do. They've probably seen at least both of them probably have seen at least thousands, maybe a little bit more with my dad, but
yeah,
they would go to the biggest hits. They would always talk to me. They would show me and my parents are kind of not super nerds, but they're nerdy enough.
Yeah.
I always joked that You know how like one of the first movies like a parent would show you would be like something like Wizard of Oz. Like I
Right,
didn't
yeah.
see that till later. My parents showed me Superman and Star Wars before they showed me Wizard of Oz,
Okay.
which I appreciate that they kind of get a little fun. I'm like, no, I love that. That's what I love.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, because my mom loves talking about how she went to like with her friend to like went to go see like whether it was a drive-in, whether it was the regular theater, like, oh, I did this and that, and my dad going to see like all these classic movies that I love. And it's I mean, obviously it's like, okay, yeah, things existed before I was born, but it's like still like kind of a little bit surreal to be like, oh yeah, I went to go see Alien in the theater. I went to go see Superman in the theater. It's still like kind of like, yeah, no, that makes sense. But then when you hear it, it's like, God, that's like
Yeah.
that was 20 years before existed. That's crazy, but it's like it makes sense. And then, oh my God, the amount of times my parents have mentioned the 4:30 movie is like crazy. It was like a thing on TV where they would play like an old classic movie for like a block for like 2 hours, and then watch it. They're like, oh yeah, like half the time we talk about a movie. She's like, oh yeah. They're like, oh yeah, I saw that on the 4:30 movie. So we kind of always grew up with that. We saw, like, me and my sisters, we watched all like the Disney animated stuff that was coming out at the time.
Yep.
The first movie I saw in theaters, according to my mom, obviously I don't remember it, was Toy Story 2, which was, I believe, 99.
Okay.
So that would have made me like 2 years old.
Okay. Wow.
So that was, I believe it was 1999. Now I got to fact check myself because it's going to bother me if I don't.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned Wizard of Oz, Star Wars, and Superman. I think I saw all three of those like around the same time growing up. But the same thing, my family, like, we didn't have a ton of money, so we didn't go on vacations. We didn't go to Disney or anything like that, but we went to movies. We went to concerts later on. So like the very first films I remember seeing, like there was a Bambi re-release in theaters. So I believe that's the first film I ever went to was the Bambi re-release. The first time I saw The Wizard of Oz was also a re-release that I saw in theaters as well. And I distinctly remember my mother took me to see Who Framed Roger Rabbit in theaters. I think I was 7 or 8. And apparently when Christopher Lloyd's true form, his true cartoon character came out, and he was threatening to put everybody in the dip, and he went a little psychotic and his eyes turned red and everything. Apparently apparently I like lost my shit, and I freaked out, and I wanted to get the fuck out of there because I was so traumatized. So those are my first memories of being in the movie theaters.
Yeah.
Too. So it's amazing what we remember, and it's amazing what sticks with us. But that's the stuff you and I enjoy, and that's the stuff we care about. So
in terms of, I did want to quickly mention though, like, I don't remember like I think the first memories of like movies was like early 2000s, like maybe when I was like at least 5.
Okay.
I remember seeing Chamber of Secrets in theaters, and I was scared out of my mind because it had not only the basilisk in it, but it had the Aragog and the spiders. So those two things freaked me the fuck out when I was a kid. I was running out of the theater. Like, I have to go to the bathroom, and I went to the bathroom by myself. And I'm like, I can't. So I was like trying to force myself to go to the bathroom because I'm like, I need a reason to like be running, screaming from the theater. I don't want to be a wimp. And I remember seeing that. I remember being scared shitless. Apologies for Spider-Man 2 with Doc Ock. Doc Ock scared the hell out of me.
Okay.
He scared me so much. And then I was like hiding. There was like a period for years where I like didn't like Spider-Man 2 because it scared me so much. And then I remember seeing Prisoner of Azkaban in the theater and I remember really liking it when I first watched it. Now I don't like it as much, but
Oh no. Interesting.
but yeah, and yeah, those were like, I don't know if like I don't remember. I don't know if I saw like I'm pretty sure I saw Philosopher's Stone in the theater.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I watched every Harry Potter movie. I just don't remember it very much.
Okay.
And I'm not sure. And I'm pretty sure I watched the first Spider-Man, but again, I don't remember that one either. But I'm pretty sure I did see them. So the very first memories are like of those where it's like 2003, 2004. Those are when like the memories are starting to like,
Yeah.
Come through of like movies. It was like the stuff I grew up with. Like the reason I got into comic book movies was Spider-Man, was the Tobey Maguire stuff, as many like Gen Z / well, Zillennial is what I'm kind of a part of.
Yeah.
And then Harry Potter was like the big, obviously that was a cultural phenomenon.
So I was going to say,
also,
you started reading comics after you saw the Spider-Man films?
well, not reading comics, but just comic book movies specifically. I didn't get into like comic books. I was a little bit too young at the time to see X-Men. So I remember seeing trailers for that, but I never went to go see the original 3 movies until like a couple of years ago when I watched the original 3 X-Men. But then I didn't see Batman Begins. I was a little bit too young for that.
Okay.
But I remember seeing Dark Knight in the theater. That was like a huge thing. It was like,
Oh yeah.
Spider-Man and the Nolan movies were like the big thing. And then, but like around the time I was like going back to watching like the old stuff, like, the Christopher Reeve Superman and the Michael Keaton Batman were like the main, like right around that time, because those were like, it was easier to watch those because like the Blade movies were kind of like they were all R-rated. So I was way too young for those. And then like all the other stuff was like way too like Daredevil and Punisher. I remember Fantastic Four. That was the other ones. I remember seeing the Fantastic Four movies in theaters.
Well, I always,
those were like kind of the main things.
I always tell people, if you don't want to be surprised, you got to read the book first. So like for you, like had you read the Harry Potter books first, maybe seeing it on film later, like already knowing what to expect, like wouldn't have traumatized you as much. Like I specifically remember, I hadn't read a single Harry Potter book until Prisoner of Azkaban, and when Gary Oldman's character is killed by Bellatrix, I was like, that's it. I need to read the rest of these books because I'm not going to have my heart ripped out like this ever again. Like I need to be prepared. Like I was so upset about that one character's death that I was like, nope, we're not doing this. I'm not going back here. Like there will be no surprises moving forward. And then cut to, I read same thing. I read all of the Twilight books. So I saw, all of the films back when they were having midnight showings, went to all the midnight showings. And have you seen the Twilight movies? Because I know you have sisters. Like I know they've exposed you to all the Princess Diary movies. So I've got to assume you've seen Twilight.
I watched the first one with friends of mine as like a bad movie roast.
Sure.
And that's
a good one
of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It was like, it wasn't even like funny bad. It was just boring. Like
That's
it
fair.
was so boring.
The pacing
Like
is
I'm
really
like,
bad in the
what
first
am I
one.
watching?
Yeah.
But my eldest sister loves Twilight. Now she like laughs at it. She's like, oh my God, I was so cringy. It's like, yeah, you were a fucking teenager. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, so what I was saying was, so in the final film, so one of the characters, Alice, is a vampire that has that can see the future before it happens, so she can kind of tell people like, hey, if you don't want this to happen, like change some shit. But anyway, so in the final film, when they get, in video game terms, when they meet up with the big boss, the final big boss at the end.
Michael Sheen, right?
Michael Sheen, man. There's a whole sequence that happens of like this big battle, which actually never happens. It's not even in the book itself. And the screaming in the theater at the midnight show, and I mean absolute carnage, chaos, riot. You would have thought people were being murdered in my theater. They were just distraught. And I'm like, well, now we know who read the books and who didn't. Okay. Because I'm sitting here, I'm like, it's clearly a vision, gang. Like what, like who is freaking out? And I'm like, oh, you didn't read the books. Okay. So that's always been my number one thing whenever anybody starts getting into like a fandom, or, you know, they start kind of doing deep dives. I'm like, you need to read the books. You need to, or read the comics, because if you don't want to be shocked, if you don't want the, you know, the wool pulled out from under you, like, you got to read the books. So, so when did you get into actually reading comics later on?
Well, it depends. Like I didn't like, so what I started to get into was like trades, because the trade paperbacks that's like the easiest way to like read comics. So
what is
I don't know.
What's the difference between a trade and a comic?
It's like a collection of like a run or like a story. Like at the time of when something's published is like the issues, like the little tiny issues you see on like a magazine rack in like a store. And then whenever the story is finished, or the run by a certain artist and writer is finished, then that gets collected into a trade paperback. So it's
is it like Cliff
you can
Notes?
find. No. It's like the entire story in like one big thing. Like the other day, I don't know if when we were doing the show and I had my big book of the New Frontier.
Yes.
That's all of the New Frontier.
So it's every edition of that comic series in one bound collection. Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, one big collection. That's the proper word I was probably trying to find, but I couldn't. So I do have like some like issues, which are like the little tiny ones, but the easiest thing to read is the trade paperback. I don't know when I started to get into it. I turned on my light because I'm looking at like, I'm trying to figure out like what like my first one was. I don't remember. If I want to say like maybe high school, maybe mid to late high school is when I started to get into like comics specifically.
Yeah.
Because it's like genuinely I have no recollection of like what like my first like real comic was, because I didn't read like a specific run of anything. In terms of like when I started to read like when the comics were coming out was when DC did the relaunch, when they made the last like 10 years non-canon, and like there was a whole thing like it's called DC Rebirth. It was after the New 52, which was supposed to be like the big DC reboot that failed miserably. So I'm like, okay, it seems like the perfect time to get into it is DC Rebirth. So I started reading them, and it was really good. And then I got caught up with something else, and then I stopped reading them, which was like right around the cusp, and like nothing was like really all that good. My friend continues to read everything because he's like, in terms of comic book nerdom, he puts me to shame. Like he, unfortunately I can't like show people, but like I have like a shelf. I have a shelf like on my top shelf. It doesn't complete it, of like my trade paperbacks.
Sure.
And then I have like a bunch of comics that my friend gave me, another friend of mine, because his like uncle gave them to him, and he's like, I don't really want these. You can do whatever you want with them. So I'm like, okay, I'll have them to have them. And then I'm going to probably sell the rest, but they've been sitting on my shelf for a while.
Well, it's so I mean, so if somebody's interested in potentially, so we were talking about this the other night on the YouTube show, and I said, you know, there's just so much, and you know, the multiverse and this version and that version, and you know, maybe if you're interested in getting into comics and you're not sure where to start, maybe a trade, I think for me would probably be the best way to go, because you've got the whole story there. You're not trying to track down like, you know, number 3 or you know, the next in that sequence, right. And then you get confused and wait a minute, that's not in the same universe. And for me, it all seems very overwhelming. So a trade
is extremely overwhelming.
Yeah, so a trade might be the best way to go if you're interested in getting into comics, or you know somebody who is, you know, kind of trying to figure out where to start, go with a trade because you get the whole thing all in one shot.
You get the whole thing. And the thing is, a lot of people think they have to like start from the very beginning. Like you have to start with Action Comics #1 and Detective Comics #27 like, and go from there. It's like, not really, because the thing is, there's maybe like a little bit of context for each story, but like you don't really need to like know every single solitary thing. You could start, like, for instance, I started reading Nightfall. I never finished it. It's really good, but like I just again got caught up with other stuff. Batman Nightfall, that was the famous story where Bane broke Batman's back, and like that was the big introduction of Bane.
Yep.
And he and the thing is, like, that was like in the middle of a run technically, but like you don't need to read like the stuff before then. You just need to understand like who's Batman, and that's it. Like vague things, and then you can just jump off from there.
Well, and to put it into context for people, you know, like Guardians of the Galaxy, they weren't created until like the 90s, right? Like they're like one of the like the youngest group of superheroes for Marvel. Were they like before or after Deadpool?
Technically.
No? Okay. I just feel like they're fairly new compared to some of the other well-established characters that everybody knows, but yet they've already got a film and they're already a part of the MCU. So like you said, my whole point with that was saying you don't have to start all the way at the beginning, because you know it's so fluid, and the popularity from character to character changes over time, that like it's like, oh, like, because if you start with #1, you've got like 30, 40, 50 years before you get to maybe the introduction of your favorite character. Like there's a lot of history there. So again, you know,
although I wanted to let you know, Guardians of the Galaxy, the original Guardians of the Galaxy was from 1969.
Oh really? However, I didn't even know that. Wow.
However, the one that the movie is based on is the 2008 team, like with Star-Lord and Groot and Rocket. So the original Guardians of the Galaxy was like this old kind of, you know, weird thing. The only character that people would know would be Yondu. He was in the original Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
But he looked and acted way different from like Michael Rooker. So it was so that was like kind of an older thing, but then it was like this old team, and then it got rebooted for like 2008, and that's like the characters that we all you know of that got adapted into the movie.
So that's where I was going with that. But again, so there's so much history and there's so much backstory that it's like, you know, it's so overwhelming. Like, where do you start? So picking up a trade is probably the best option there if that's what you or someone you know might be interested in doing. But let's get into, and again, and I've asked you this question before, your title, to me, you're a professional YouTuber. Is that right? Or what would you classify yourself as?
I'm technically a YouTuber. I don't know about professional, but
well, you've got your own show. You make a little income off of it. And again, you contribute to the stuff that Dan is a part of. If you guys do a search on YouTube for DCU Daily, John and I have been on that. And then there's also a weekly show, Oh So Curious, that again, John has been with them pretty much since the beginning. I've randomly just started showing up on occasion. Not since the beginning. Okay.
I've actually only really been with them for like a year.
Okay. So how did you meet Dan and get involved in all of that then? So
what happened was I was just looking through, there's a bunch of sites for like filmmaking kind of stuff where it's like, oh, we need an editor, we need a cinematographer, we need this and this for this film that we're making, whether it's a documentary, a short film, a feature film. And it was this site called Mandy. And so I was just looking through it, and I saw like, content producer needed for DCU Daily. I'm like, well, I fucking love DC. Let me try to shoot my shot here.
Yeah.
And so I like messaged him like, hey, I'm interested. And then we kind of had like 2 interviews, but with Dan being as scatterbrained as he is, I mean, love the man, but like
He's got a lot going on.
He's like has his mind in like 12 different directions.
Yeah.
The fact that he's still functioning is still a shock to me. But so we had a couple interviews and he's like, okay, well, I'll keep you like in mind. And then I'm like, all right. And then he just didn't talk to me for like, I don't know, a month maybe. So I then got another job in the meantime. And I was like, okay, I'll just do this. And I was like a fucking like door-to-door salesman, which fucking that was the second time I got COVID, actually, was because of that.
Yeah.
And the guys like kind of after a certain point just started treating me like shit because I did terribly at the job. So because it's like, they were like, and it was so funny, like a little bit of a side tangent. Like they were like, so like, oh yeah, this is like the thing to do. It's like, bro, that's not 1955 anymore. Nobody is a fucking door-to-door salesman if you want to sell your shit. Like they're like, oh, it's a personal thing with customers. It's like nobody wants to open their door anymore. Like, why are we doing this? And the thing is, I tried to be like charismatic and like, oh, this is good stuff. And it's like, they're like, fuck off, get off my porch. It's like, yeah, that was like an experience. And then what was so funny about it is like I got like a couple sales in, but like it was commission only. So I didn't get paid until like after I got fired.
Oh god.
And it was like $150, like a month of work of like doing all this shit, and that was it. And I got terminated over text, which was also like real nice. And what was so funny about it is like I was literally the guy who he was like kind of like my trainer kind of thing. I was literally the day before I was in a room with him alone. And I said, bye this I don't want to like, I might hate them, but I don't want to dox them.
Nope, that's okay.
But I'm like, bye name. And he's like, oh yeah, bye man. And then I left, but like we were literally in the room together alone. He could have told me like, hey, I'm sorry, but you're not like pulling sales. You're not really good at this. You're not like into it. So it's like, I think we should part ways. Nope. He waited until the next day and he texted me and he's like, what are your thoughts about this job? Like, are you like into it? But like, I had like, it was not even a minute goes by of like, okay, let me try to formulate a very intricate response for this because he's letting me know how I am at this job. I was like, going to be honest, but I was going to try to hang on. And he's like, well, you're terminated. And I'm like, all right. Like, he didn't even give me a chance to like talk or anything. And it's like, all right, thanks for that. I mean, whatever. But that was funny.
Yeah,
so,
we've all been there. We've all been in positions that just weren't the right fit, and you know,
it was just all like so weird, so weird and so funny looking back. But then after that was done, I think it was like late November, maybe mid to late November or December, where Dan got back to me. He's like, "Hey, you still alive?" And I'm like, "Are you?" And he was like, "Why don't we start to like get this going?" And I'm like, okay, I didn't realize I was still under your employment, but sure.
Yeah.
And so then we started to do like the first few months, we did like 2 or 3 recordings, like tapings, nothing live. And we were going to upload those later. But then when the new year started, like I think like around February, maybe March, he was like, okay, this isn't really working. Let's do weekly stuff. And I think it was in February when we really started to like put stuff aside so we could like do stuff weekly.
Yeah.
And then that's what we were doing. We started to do weekly stuff, and then we were like doing like fan castings and stuff because there was nothing to talk about the DCU. There was nothing. There was like a couple things here and there. It might have been when the new year started. Okay. I might be getting my information wrong. I think it was when the new year started. He was like, let's try to, instead of just tapings, let's try to actually do this weekly or do this daily. And then like, so it was like kind of scattered. We did like maybe 2 to 3 times a week. And then February was like, it started to get going when we started to really do daily stuff, quote unquote, daily stuff.
Yeah.
And then that's when it really started to kind of take off. Like, it was like February when it was like, okay, that's when Superman started filming. So that was like a big thing. That was like a huge thing. And then it kind of went along steadily for the next few months. But it was like we were trying to find anything to talk about because there was no news.
Right.
There was no news for DCU because it was like a new thing. The only thing we had was like, oh, Superman just started filming on February 29th. So that was it. And then June hit, and that was when DCU finally like exploded. Like that was when, because that's when like all these photos started to come out for Superman. Yeah. That's when all these set photos were getting released. We saw the costume, we saw all these other characters, we saw Cleveland, what it would look like, what the extras looked like, what like some action set pieces would look like. So we were like going in, and that's pretty much when we got our current audience of like people who, are like currently watching, like, well, I'm gonna name drop some people, but like, yeah, they like Lenny Solon and Miraculous, Derpy Entertainment, Hunter Iggy, like all these guys, I'm probably following. Elite Eazy-E is a newer one, like, yeah, all these like regulars that like are really enjoying our stuff, and it feels pretty nice.
No,
like,
it is really nice. Yeah.
This is pretty cool.
Well, and for people who don't understand, like, so, I, as everyone is fully aware, like I am all in on Marvel. I'm a stan with Marvel. You're a stan with DC, which is great. But
yes, I love both, but I prefer DC.
But like you were saying, like prior to like, even though DC kept releasing projects and movies and stuff all the way along the same, along with Marvel, they just weren't hitting the mark. They weren't connecting with audiences. They like, yes, you always are going to have your DC stans, but it really wasn't until like James Gunn started attaching himself to these projects and really started kind of hyping up all of the new stuff that was coming. And it seemed like there was this like evolution, revolution, whatever you want to call it, of the DC brand. And, because before, what was it? It was Michael Keaton's Batman. And then it was Christian Bale's Batman. Like those were the only times I really remember. And then, of course, yes, the Superman stuff, Henry Cavill Superman, and but those were the only times I ever remember like the world collectively like getting hype about any DC related projects. Like even their TV shows were kind of, again, if you were a DC stan, you're watching them, but they weren't hitting the mainstream. They weren't getting the notoriety that maybe some people felt they deserved. I mean, even Suicide Squad, as we all know, had its issues. The Harley Quinn character has its issues. They kept trying, and it just seemed like they kept failing and they kept falling flat on their face. But now, with this new evolution, these new storylines coming out, these new projects coming out, it seems like they've kind of, I wouldn't say, well, yeah, actually, maybe they have. They kind of have overshadowed Marvel, because Marvel, and I've talked about this on the show ad nauseum as well, Marvel did too much in a very short amount of time, to the point where they kind of pissed people off, because it was like, if I'm not subscribed to Disney Plus, I'm missing out. If I'm not subscribed to Netflix, I'm missing out. If I'm not going to the theater every other week, I'm missing out. Because as much as I love that they connect all of the stories and there's continuity there with each storyline and each character, you have to pay attention and you have to follow all of that in order to understand what the fuck is going on. Like, my mom really wanted to see the Marvels, and I said to her, but you haven't watched Miss Marvel. You have, like, you haven't watched Loki. Like, there are other pieces at play that are a part of this storyline that you're not going to understand. Like, even, Tammy and I, my best friend Tammy and I, we went to see Deadpool 3. She adores Deadpool. She loves Deadpool. Has never watched a single other Marvel production, TV show, film, whatever. So we're in the theater in the fan preview Dolby event, and I'm explaining to her who Blade is and who Elektra is and and who Gambit is and why, like, it's crazy that all of these characters are making these cameos. I had to explain to her why it was hilarious that Chris Evans was the Human Torch and not Captain America. Like, so that's always been my issue with Marvel, is that they are trying to do all of the things, but they're not making it universally accessible to everybody, because they're across all these different platforms. But now it seems DC it's weird because DC still has that continuity issue where their storylines don't always connect, where their characters aren't always going to come together. Like I've said this to you too, like our Pat's Batman and Jason Momoa's Aquaman will never be in the same room. You know what I mean? Like they're two completely different universes. So in that regard, it's good if you're only watching things piecemeal here and there when you get a moment. At least you're not confused, because it's like you can understand that this is a completely different world. This is a completely different universe, completely different subset of characters. However, I want it all to make sense, and I want it all to be on the, you know what I mean? Like, so I always struggle with it. So I am excited for the hype. I'm excited for what's coming down the pipeline, because they seem to finally have somebody that is a true fan and is motivated and wants to do it the right way. And they seem to be letting him for the most part for now. We'll see what happens. But DC always end up disappointing me at the end of the day, because either the writing failed or they edited the project to the point where it doesn't look anything like it originally was intended to look. So I am optimistic, because the fans seem to be really excited for what's coming. And like I said, having somebody like James Gunn, who we know, through his work with Marvel, with Guardians, we know he can deliver. And hopefully DC just lets him do what he wants to do. But it is.
I mean, he is the co-CEO of DC Studios, so like the only one that's above him is David Zaslav. So it seems like he's gonna do whatever the fuck he wants.
Right, but to your point, it's
no
nice.
way.
But to your point, it's nice because it seems like the DC fans are finally getting what they've been looking for, what they've been trying to get DC to produce, and as far as quality, as far as having the right people behind them. So that's exciting. And we've talked about on DCU Daily, we've talked about the show The Penguin, which is on HBO Max. If anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it. Now, again, we've talked about this. It's, to me, it is a show that is based on comic book characters, yes, but in no way is it a comic book show to me. So if anyone's kind of been hearing about it, of seeing some clips and things like that, it's a mafioso show. It is an absolute drama. It is this family versus this family. We're trying to take over the city. It's an absolute mafioso drama. So I highly recommend it if you're a fan of like The Sopranos, if you're any of those kinds of shows. It's Colin Farrell as the Penguin, and he is incredible. His prosthetics are unbelievable. But it's really something that everybody should watch and check out, and maybe that'll get you interested in what DC has coming up, because there's a lot of shit coming up, and it's all pretty exciting. But let's talk about your YouTube show. Did you start that prior to working with Dan? Did you already have something going, or was that okay? So talk to me about that. What is it called? Where can people find you? And why did you decide to start, broadcasting on YouTube?
So I started in 2017. That's when. Oh my
gosh.
That was pretty much when I did my first video. Originally, for years, I was super into like Lego animation. That was like what I wanted to do on like a YouTube channel for years, but it takes so much time.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And I didn't have like I didn't have like my own like income to like buy every Lego set I wanted to do. Like I had like a couple things that I'm like, oh, I could do that, I could do this, and like I planned for it, but then I'm like, it's a lot of work, and I'm not, and plus, like, just around the time when I was like, I could be able to start my own YouTube channel and like do it, the Lego animation was like kind of going like, I would say the way of the dinosaurs. It was like at its height in like the late 2000s
Yeah.
and
And then all the
early
Lego movies
2010s.
came out. Yeah.
And then because there was a lot of people like Forest Fire 101, Blob Studios, and like all those Custard Productions, like all those guys, they their Lego stuff was like amazing, and then they were all like working with each other, and that was like the big thing that I was like really into. And then like, oh, what are some other ones? I can't think of any off the top of my head, but that was like what I really wanted to do at first. But then in 2017, I don't know if you know who he is, but James Rolfe announced that he would no longer be doing Monster Madness. Now, Monster Madness is a horror-a-thon where he posted a review every day for the month of October in honor of like Halloween and that time of year.
Okay.
And he would, just review horror movies. They would be like quick little reviews of like 2 to 4 minutes of like, he would have like a theme almost every year. Like originally it was like the history of horror, like every like great horror movie. Like he would like review Dracula, the Wolfman, and then like more modern stuff like Alien and Jaws and The Evil Dead and, all that. And he would do that. And then like later years, he did like cult movies that were like so bad they're good, like Plan 9 from Outer Space and all that.
Yeah.
Bride of the Monster and, Manos, the Hands of Fate and all that. And then he did that for like 10 years. And then he announced in 2016, 2017, like that the 10th one would be the last year. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of suckish. I'm like, let's see, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to continue it myself. Ironically, he didn't stop. He just changed it a bit, and then he just went right back into doing it again. Okay. So what I did was mood, but that's beside the point. But I actually emailed him. I'm like, hey, James, I know you're probably never going to see this, but would it be okay if I continued Monster Madness? And he actually got back to me. He actually said, he's like, I think what you should do is use Monster Madness, but make it your own thing.
Right.
Make it your own, use your own channel and use your own name and instead of because ours is Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, make sure it's it's your channel name Monster Madness. I'm like, okay. So that's what I did. I did these I just found a bunch of movies that I really liked, 31 movies that I really liked, and just talked about them. And then I started doing themes every year. And that was the big jumping off point. Originally it was movies that he had not reviewed. I try to avoid movies he reviewed.
That's fair, yeah.
And then I just kind of started and then I started to kind of do other stuff. For the first 2 years, it was just Monster Madness. Those were the only videos I posted. It was just throughout the month of October. That was the only thing I planned to do. And then I was watching a lot of the Arrowverse shows at the time. And so I was so between the Arrowverse and the DCEU, I was wow, it really sucks to be a fucking DC fan right now because they're producing the worst stuff imaginable. Batman versus Superman and Suicide Squad just came out, and this was back when I liked Batman vs. Superman, but everyone else hated it. And then Suicide Squad was terrible.
Yeah.
So we're okay. And then the Arrowverse shows were starting to get really bad. So I was writing a bunch of fan fiction at the time. Not smut, get your head out of the gutter. Just my own thing. So I was this is how I would do it differently.
Yeah.
And then I was getting into Supergirl, and that was a show that started out okay. The first season was pretty good, and then it never got. It was became terrible. So I'm how would I do the show? So then I posted those videos, And then I started to slowly but surely get into like other stuff that's not Monster Madness. Like it was mainly like comic booky stuff.
Yeah.
It was, you know, I'm actually going, like, I don't remember like the exact like videos that I did, but it was like, oh, like it was like my vision for Supergirl, and then I also did like history of like, oh, history of like Batman in movies and Superman in movies and like that kind of thing. They weren't very good.
Yeah.
And then I you know, it was, you know, the how to fix Supergirl, and then, you know, I started like the thing that really like ironically, if we're talking ironically, the first video that like really hit the stride of like, it was like the first video where I got quadruple numerical views, like over 1,000 views, was my review of the show Dickinson, which I've never even heard of. It was an Apple TV Plus show. It starred Haley Steinfeld as Emily Dickinson. It was an okay show. It wasn't that great.
Okay.
But it was one of those shows where like I watched it because I like her. Like I love Haley Steinfeld. Yeah. She's a great actress and also extremely hot. But like, so I watched the show. I was like really curious. I watched it and I was like, it was one of those shows where I like couldn't get it out of my head. Okay. So I'm like, I want to talk about this. I'm like, you know, let me just talk about it on my YouTube channel. So that's what I did. I talked about it and like it exploded. It was like my most popular video up until that point, where it got like 1,000 views. Yeah. And I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. So I got I got quite a few subscribers from that. And then I like finished my Supergirl stuff. I did another, right around the time I did another how to fix of like Titans, that god awful show. I'm like, hey, what if Titans was actually good? And then I got into like more DC stuff. And then the next thing that hit my stride and really got my channel, like the subscribers, was the DCEU project. Is like, what if I made the DCEU and what I would do? And that's like, those videos pretty much got like hundreds of views. And that's pretty much when I got like, quote unquote, I mean, I'm not popular. I still only have like a little under 2,000 subscribers. It's not like a huge channel or anything.
That's a nice number though.
But it's still a decent number. And, so I still get like, you know, so those videos, like the first one got like 1,000, and like, well, now it's hard to tell because like if you look at the channel now, like the first one has like almost 5,000 views, so it's hard to like, but it did get a couple hundred at the time. And then so I was doing Monster Madness at the time, but then the main thing I really started to do was like other stuff, and that's what I was like really getting into. I canceled the thon, which I think was Monster Madness 4, was the one that I got a lot of views for certain things. Like a bunch of those, if you look on my channel, like a bunch of those videos were like, each one got like hundreds of views and like regularly hit like 1,000. In fact, my video on the canceled, Killer Clowns from Outer Space sequel is still my highest viewed video with 25,000 views. Wow. And I'm like, all right, okay, like I'll take it. But it's interesting how it was that. But each video has like, now looking back, has like thousands of views. Like, you know,
that's great.
My like the canceled Mummy 4. It has like 15,000 views and all that. So that's when like I got like another huge influx of stuff. And then I just was like, you know, I'm just going to do whatever my mind, you know, comes out with. And then I started doing Doctor Who stuff, because that was the thing I abandoned comics for, was I started watching classic Doctor Who.
Nice.
And that was like during lockdown. Like that's when I just got furloughed from my second job at the time. So I had more, although I worked at a gas station, I was essential. So that was like my main job. So I was still going out, but I was, watching Doctor Who. Like it was like, as like a lot of people were doing during lockdown, like that was the thing, like you were doing something that like helped keep you sane.
Right.
And that was the thing that helped me keep me sane was like, I'm going to watch after like Doctor Who completely and utterly just went terribly with the twist. I'm not even going to get into that because then I'll go on a huge rant. But I was like, you know what? This show is like terrible now. Let me go back to the classics. So that's what I did is I watched 26 years of television in a year. And then I just started like doing whatever I just kind of felt like it. Like, Monster Madness 5 and like all this other stuff. And then I really started like, it was pretty much around like 3 years ago when I really was like getting into it. Like I was like really making like any video I like wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, so this is why I wanted to talk to you.
And that's when I was really getting views, and it was like really awesome. And I'm like, now I'm into it. So I've been trying to do weekly videos, which is like,
well,
crazy,
and this is part of the reason that I wanted to talk to you, because I feel like so many people, and I had that same problem too before I started the podcast. Like, you see what other people are doing, right? You see clips on TikTok, you see other videos on YouTube, especially people who may be particularly popular. And it seems like you need to have all of this background in production and editing and graphics, and you need to, hit people with all this flash and all of these, really polished things that you had to put together. And it was always so overwhelming to me that I was just like, there's no way that I can do that. I don't know anything about equipment. I don't know anything about editing. What would I even say, kind of thing. But then, finally I just said, like, this is something that I want to do, and just fuck it. And it can be raw, and it can be, thankfully I have producer Mike to help me with my editing and stuff like that. But it was one of those things where it was like, I finally just pulled the trigger and did it. And that's like, so that's always been what's been so interesting to me about these things. Like same thing for you. Like, you just all of a sudden one day decided, fuck it, and let's roll. And just started, filming yourself and just you talking to a camera and putting it on YouTube. And again, not to devalue what you're doing, but like, it's not high production. There's, you're not throwing in,
it's not.
Yeah. So, you don't have a team behind you. You don't have the most advanced equipment, but it was just nothing. One of those things, just like, me. Yeah, just you voicing your opinion out into the ethos and somehow, some way connecting with people. And you haven't stopped either. Like, that's the thing that people, I think, have a hard time wrapping their head around as well, is like, people can get caught up in the numbers. Like, people ask me that all the time when I ask people to come on the pod for the first time. They're like, oh, well, what's your fan base? What's your numbers? I couldn't fucking tell you. I have no idea. I can see things like how many people like download episodes. I can see that. I can't see specifically how many times somebody listens. I can only see the download numbers, those kinds of things. But like, I never gave a fuck about it because it never mattered to me. Like,
neither do I.
If I ever start to monetize on it, then maybe, that might matter at some point. If that, if it affects my paycheck day to day. But as of right now, it's still completely free. No, I don't have a Patreon. I have nothing. So like those kinds of things. Yeah. Like, I'm just doing this for myself. And if I get somebody to listen, that's wonderful. But I think so many people get hung up in, especially now with this whole TikTok culture of like, I have to be the next David Dobrik. I have to be the next Mr. Beast. Ew. And it's like, then you're doing it for all the wrong reasons. I think even Mr. Beast has admitted fully, like, he's running out of ideas. He's running out of shit. And that's why his empire is kind of starting to crumble, because he's getting into a lot of hot
the
water.
Allegations.
Well, exactly.
Don't help matters either.
And he's got a bunch of shitty people around him. Yeah. But that's kind of what I want to, really explain to people is like, if you're going in just because you have a passion, you're motivated to talk about something, there's a subject matter that you care about, then just do it. Just do it. Like, You don't need to have hundreds of views. You don't need to have, thousands of followers. Just go out there and do it, because you will connect with somebody at some level at some point.
Yeah.
So I'm glad, like, I was really surprised to hear that you started in 2017. Like, holy shit, it's almost 10 years worth of work, which is great. But like you said, you're still, it's not paying all your bills. Like you still are looking for other jobs and other projects.
DCU Daily barely pays my bills.
Right. So, but it's a passion of yours, clearly. And I support it. And I think that's amazing. I should ask, so you're a big, like, again, you said with the Monster Madness, like, you're a huge horror movie guy. What got you into horror movies, and what is, because I am not a fan of horror movies. I have seen some here and there. I'm very particular about the ones that I see, but what is it about them that draws you to them, that you love so much, that, and because you've seen all variations, you've seen very classic films, but you to the more obscure, to the more, like, independently put together, like, you've seen all of the Terrifier films, for example, whereas I, like, just learned about that.
I actually have not seen all of them.
Oh no. Okay.
I've only seen the second one. I haven't seen all Hallows Eve. I haven't seen the first Terrifier. Okay. I plan to see Terrifier 3 when Christmas rolls around.
It's still in theaters, which is wild.
So yeah. I'm sure it'll, like, maybe around the time, it'll either stay in theaters until Christmas and then I'll go see it then, or they're going to take it out of theaters and then it'll be re-released at around Christmas time.
Well, and they've already greenlit Terrifier 4, so it's like, it's just
it's crazy.
But so talk to me about that. So like, what was one of the first, like, horror films that you ever saw, and then again, what is it about these films that you love so much?
Well, the thing is that got me into it was Monster Madness, was James Rolfe talking about horror movies. If you'd believe it, when I was a kid, I was terrified of everything. Okay. I was scared of my own shadow. Like, I was like, I couldn't even watch a clip of, like, Jaws or The Exorcist without, like, freaking out. Like straight up, I was just talking about how Chamber of Secrets and Spider-Man 2 scared me as a kid. Like, stuff that was, like, not scary at all, it scared the hell out of me. And so, like, for years I would just be like horror was just something that, like, it was a terrifying, I'm like, I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to look at that. And then when I got into James Rolfe, because he did Angry Video Game Nerd, that was, like, the big thing that I watched. It was in middle school, was when I got into that. And then because that was, like, his prime, that was, like, the huge thing that, like, it was like a internet phenomenon at that point, was, like, movie reviewing and, like, having your own lore and shit was, like, AVGN, Nostalgia Critic, a lot of Channel Awesome people, Nostalgia Critic and Todd in the Shadows and, Phaelus, all these guys, Linkara, all these guys, like, doing all these kinds of reviews. That was, like, it was like Lego Animation, and then these guys were, like, the biggest things that I watched when I was younger. Yeah. And then I was like, man, I want to watch other stuff he's done. So I started to watch, like, other stuff he's done. And then James Rolfe was, like, starting to talk about, like horror movies. I was like, these masterpieces. And I'm like, I never really thought about it like that. And so I started watching, I don't know when, like, my first, like, I feel comfortable in saying that my first, like, real horror movie was probably Halloween. That I feel comfortable in saying that, like, that. I don't know if that was, like, the first ever one I really watched. Right. But, like, if we're being technical, I would say my first horror movie was probably The Terminator, because I watched that at, like, 10 or 11, but a lot of people don't count that. I count it as a horror movie. So
that's interesting. So what about that makes it a horror? Because I would classify it just as an action film.
James Cameron said it was a slasher movie.
That's interesting.
He said it's just like, it's because it's like, if you get rid of the sci-fi aspect, it's a slasher movie. Like, you have an unkillable killer, you have a final girl, you have the final scare, you have, like, all these horror tropes. It just so happens that it's a robot from the future. Like that was like the main hook. So everyone saw that as a science fiction film.
How interesting.
And that's what he's like. And then James Cameron's like, well, I guess I'm a sci-fi director now. So then he went full in on sci-fi because he did horror movies. Like he worked with like Roger Corman. His first quote unquote real movie was Piranha 2, The Spawning.
Right.
And so he like got into this industry for horror, and the Terminator was like this perfect mix of horror and sci-fi, but it was intended to be a slasher movie.
That's interesting.
I mean, slasher movies were huge at the time. It was 84.
Yeah.
So that's what he intended it to be, but everyone's like, oh, no, this is a science fiction movie. And then he's like, okay, I guess it's a science fiction movie. But I mean, I say, ¿por qué no los dos? Why not both?
Yeah.
So it's a sci-fi horror film. And so if we're being technical, that was like my first horror film was The Terminator, I guess.
That's really fascinating. How
but
interesting.
if you want to be technical, because at the time in my head, I didn't view it as a horror movie. So like nowadays I do. So I'll say The Terminator, but if we're like the thing that jump started, like what you're specifically asking, what jump started my love of horror was probably Halloween.
Okay.
So that's what really got me like into it. Was like and then I started watching more and more, and I started watching like just like all these movies. And the thing is, because they were so much, and then like Dexter also helped because that was like a horror show in like a way, if you really think about it.
Yeah.
It's like about a serial killer, and it's like all these like fucked up things you see like as part of as being a cop.
Are you going to watch the new Dexter that's coming out?
Oh yeah, hell yeah. I mean,
I'm going to watch it just because of Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Dexter.
Yeah.
I didn't realize she was in it.
Yeah, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Christian Slater. Yeah.
Patrick Dempsey, I know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm gonna watch the origin show, and then I'm gonna watch the inevitable sequel because they just can't let this character fucking die. But so Dexter also helped a lot, but those two things were like the major things that got me like really into horror, and what really got me, became like and then I just like didn't stop.
Well, and so what is it about
high school, college was like,
and what is it
like,
about these movies that you love? What is it that draws you to them?
Because there's a lot of different answers to that. I'll try to like say all of them. It's the first reason that comes to mind is like, it's the most subjective genre, I say. Like, I know all film is subjective, but I think the two most subjective movie genres are comedy and horror.
Okay.
Because, sure, like a drama is usually pretty clear cut. It's either good or it's bad. Like, sure, you're going to have some people that are like, I think The Godfather sucks. It's like, of course you're going to have those people.
Sure.
But like, you also, but like, most people can agree, like, oh, this drama is good because of this, this, and this, or this, science fiction movie is good because of this, this, and this. But sure, you can look at it as a movie, but then when you get deep into it, like, you also have the element of fear, and we're all scared by something different. What scares you is not going to scare me.
Right.
Like, somebody can be terrified of The Shining, but I was bored by it. Like, I was not scared by it, and I was bored by it. Yet I think like The Changeling was terrifying, yet somebody else could be like, that was not scary at all.
Right.
So we look at horror movies as movies, yes, and some of them are great, some of them are all that. But then you look under the surface of like, but it's also what we fear. And that's like some people have arachnophobia, some people have tryptophobia, some people have, like all these fears. Somebody could fear like pants. Like there's a fear of pants.
Yeah.
Like it's just like, that's like,
or of a tire. Yeah.
Some people view like there were the scenes in Train Spotting with the baby on the ceiling with like, you know, there was like people are scared of that, but then other people aren't. So we look at them as movies, but at the same time we also look, and then at the same time, like comedy, what we find funny, what I find funny, you might not find funny.
Right.
So it's not only the element of the film itself, but underneath the surface of like what we fear and what we find funny. Now, I love comedy movies. I love to laugh. I was literally just watching this really good movie. I haven't finished it just yet. I got caught up with a lot of other stuff. But Hundreds of Beavers, it's on Tubi for free. It's like if you like the Marx Brothers type stuff, that it's like a live action comedy. It's like a live action cartoon. Sorry, live action cartoon where it's like all this like cartoon logic, but it's like real people.
Okay.
And it's really funny, and it's just like one of those like slapsticky kind of, you know, movies, but it's like I needed like a good comedy. So I was like, all right, let's watch this. My friend recommended it, and it's really funny. So, but it's like some other people might not find that funny, you know? But it's just like horror intrigued me because it just you have that like extra element, and then like you also, the thing about horror as well that I find so intriguing is from like a societal point of view is how we see the worst of humanity through horror, you know?
Okay.
So you see it as like sort of like a commentary thing. How we've like, it's like putting a mirror up against us and seeing what the worst of us has to offer. And that kind of intrigues me.
Okay.
Especially in this day and age where I've become more of an optimist. Thanks, Superman. You know, how that, like how, and especially for the time, like how from like a cultural point of view, like that's why like a lot of horror movies in the late 30s and early 40s went more of a comedy route, because it's like we were going through the most horrific war imaginable at that point. We didn't really need horror to distract us. It was already horrific. We needed something to laugh at. That's why it was like, sure, you had like still like horror movies that were coming out, like The Spiral Staircase and The Wolfman and all that.
Right.
But it was mostly like funny stuff. Like Abbott and Costello was like it was like that type of thing. And then, you know, we also like Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, where it was like more like spectacle and that kind of thing. It was more about the comedy, because it's like World War II was just like taking everything out of us, and we were just like, we just want to laugh at this point. So like horror was like kind of a bit of a standstill in the 40s, and like was kind of not like that. And then I always like to talk about this whenever I think about Halloween, is Halloween was like, it was made around the time when like all of these serial killers were like getting caught. Son of Sam, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy. You had all these guys that were just doing these completely horrific things. And then you had like someone like Ted Bundy who just like doubled down on his innocence, where he's like, no, I'm just a cool, chill guy who's doing cool, chill things because I'm cool. And it's just like, you had that, but then I can only imagine what like John Carpenter was like, and to an extent Deborah Hill, after they got this idea, Irwin Yablin's getting the idea initially, and then like John Carpenter like really making it work, was like seeing all these people that were not people, and then like seeing how like a serial killer's mind works, and then like him using that for what he envisioned for Michael Myers. Like the most like innocent, like an innocent name, Michael Myers. It's the name of a comedian, right? You know, that we all know and love. So like the only thing kind of strange about it is the illiterateness of it, but it's Michael. You know a Michael. I know a Michael. Right. We know a Myers. I know a Myers. You know a Myers. Yep. It's like Michael Myers. I was like, okay. And then, but with how John Carpenter envisioned this character was like, and what kind of got lost in the sequels, but I'm just talking about the original movie, was how like he envisioned the Shape, what he is called throughout the movie, the Shape, is the personification of evil.
Right.
And how like he's like Dr. Loomis says throughout the movie, he's not a man, it's an it, because anything like that existed of any sort of humanity that maybe did exist, maybe it didn't, is gone.
Right.
And
right.
it's just this evil incarnate, because that's like, and if you go back to what John Carpenter was experiencing at the time, was like all these like serial killers and like taking the life of another human being and then enjoying it enough to do it many times over.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wow, that's like so innately fucking scary. I mean, it still is. Like, I'm not saying it isn't.
Oh, no, absolutely.
But like
yeah.
the 70s were like such a big time for like serial killers.
Right.
I guess that was the thing to do back then. But
well, let me let me turn it
like
a different way. Yeah, I have a friend who, same thing. He loves horror movies, but he got into it later on in life. He actually started watching horror films after his wife had passed. And I asked him about it one day. I was like, what is it about these films? And he said, well, when my wife had passed, I had felt every emotion anybody can feel, right? And I just wanted an escape, but I wanted something that didn't make me feel anything. You know what I mean? Like, because he's like, you watch these horror movies and I can't imagine going through anything like that. I can't imagine being that person and you know, trying to attack people or kill people or torture people. So he said they were just so far removed from any reality that I've ever experienced that those were just what I started gravitating to, because they just it was nice to just have a true escape, not a comedy that still has some humanity behind it, certainly not a drama that makes you think and makes you go through all those different emotions. He's like, this I could sit down, watch one of these horror movies and completely remove myself from the situation, because it's just so far-fetched, it's just not based in any reality that I know, that it was the only comforting thing that I could turn to at the time. So it's like you said, yes, it's subjective, but it's also very interesting, what like you said, what people get out of it. Like, again, for me, The Strangers is my biggest fear in life. Like being in a cabin in the middle of the woods and looking out into the darkness, and there's just a figure standing there staring back at you through the window. Like that's my number one. And even though I don't watch horror movies, whenever The Strangers comes out, I go and I watch that in theaters. I can't explain it. I don't know why. That's
right.
It's like having, a fear of spiders and going and watching Arachnophobia on purpose. Like I don't get why I do that, but it's like you said, totally subjective. It's just so interesting to me what people gravitate to and what they take away from these films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say, there is the final reason, and I'm going to get a little bit schmaltzy here. I do apologize. Okay. But the final reason why I think I love horror movies is because I identify with them a lot. Like, not as like specific movies, but like as a genre. They're the outcast genre.
Okay.
They're the unloved. They're the horror is the unloved, the uncaring, least compassion. Like when it comes to like award shows or like stuff like that, nobody looks at horror movies. Yet they have the most to say, and nobody cares because it's like, oh, people getting slashed up, people getting,
right. We can't take this seriously.
Because like people. Yeah, people see them because like they see slasher movies and that's all they see, where it's like, no, horror movies are so much more than that. And it's just like technically the only horror movie to ever win Best Picture is one that's not categorized as a horror movie because they don't want to believe that it's a horror movie. And that was Silence of the Lambs.
Okay,
I don't care what anybody says. Silence of the Lambs is a fucking horror movie.
100%.
Like the main villain wants to create a skin suit out of fat girls. Like that's a horror movie.
Yeah.
Like but it's like, oh, it was based on a book. It's like higher brow. It's like it's a psychological thriller. And that's a whole nother argument for another day. But it's like you could talk about like, oh yeah, my favorite movie is Back to the Future. My favorite movie is Blade Runner. My favorite movie is What's Up, Doc. My favorite movie is The Godfather. And you'll be like, okay, cool, yeah, that sounds great. And then you talk about it. And then but then you could like, my favorite movie is The Thing, The Wolfman, Halloween, Strangers, The Exorcist. People will like give you like an eye of like, okay, this guy's clearly crazy.
Right.
And it's like, why do I have to get that? Because it's just like, I enjoy like that sort of thing. So it's like, I kind of related to that a lot as someone who is still pretty much an outcast to like, I mean, more so when I was a kid, but now now I've embraced it. But like at the time of like being a kid of like I had almost no friends. I got bullied a lot. So I I think I subconsciously like realizing what James Rolfe was saying and like kind of like going towards that of like the unloved genre of film really like spoke to me.
Yeah.
And really, I just kind of fell in love with that because of that. Like there are the reasons of like horror being the most subjective from a cultural standpoint of what we see in us and like how maybe we can fix that, maybe we can't.
Right.
But then there's also me personally in terms of the relatability. Like, no, even though you'll have all these amazing movies that'll never get the time of day because of what they are, it's like I identify with that a lot.
Yeah.
So I feel like horror is just there's the relatability stance for me is like and not only, I mean, I still love these movies. Like they're amazing and they're like, you could have like something fun, like Shaun of the Dead, but then you could have something so terrifying, like The Thing. And, it's, and I kind of like, it's like kind of like the little genre that could, where it's just like, even though like, it's not loved by the Academy or the Hollywood press or, all these other like award shows outside of like the Saturn Awards and like a couple others, where it's just like, but yet my friend was making like an argument for it. It's like it's recession proof because it's like no matter what, it'll make money. Look at Terrifier 3.
Right.
It made like $50 million already.
Right, absolutely.
And it was like made for $2 million. So it's like horror will always be like a constant one. As long as there is humanity, there will be horror because there's just innately terrible people out there that will inspire a good person to like make something about them or have that idea of like a horrible situation where it's like, that's interesting, and make something out of it. And I respect that. Like, I just, like horror is just one of those things where it's like, it's not loved, so I guess I have to love it. So, it's like, that's in the eyes of like, the cultural zeitgeist, it's like horror is just like the kid that gets like bullied, but it's like, you know what, I'm gonna be the other kid that stands up for it, and if I have to do that, I'll do that, and I'll do that until the day I die. Well, and I'm happy to do that for the horror genre because no matter what, it was there for me, so I'm going to be there for it.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Well, no, I totally appreciate that. And I thank you for sharing your views because again, like I said, it's not my cup of tea, but I am always very interested in what it is about that genre that people gravitate to and what people get out of it. So I appreciate you for sharing that. Now, if anyone wants to look up your YouTube stuff, where can they find you? How can they look up those things?
So I'm going to drop the 3 channels I do. So obviously we've been talking about DCU Daily. So Oh So Curious, that's the one we do where if you want to know about DC stuff, go there. Me and somebody else, whether it's Liz, usually it's Dan, but he's sick this week. Yeah. So, Liz, Bridget, Angelina, usually me and one other person are talking about DC. I'm like usually the constant, because I don't get sick and I have no life. So I'm usually the guy to do it. So Oh So Curious, go check check me out there. Then I also have my main channel, The Geek Informant, originally called Media Wave Productions. But that was when I started, because that was like at the perfect time. That was based on a little quick thing of a video store right near where I lived, and it closed right around the time I started my channel. So I'm like, in order to commemorate it, I will call it Media Wave. But then it didn't work, and I'm like, I feel like it's kind of a lame title, so I'm gonna move on to something else. So The Geek Informant is what I am. Go subscribe, go watch. I just released another video today talking about, well, I don't know when this is like going to go up, but like today when we're recording this, right, I just released my video on Richard Kelly's version of the movie Holes, which, if that sounds as weird as you think it is, go watch the video, because it gets weirder.
Okay.
So I have that, and then finally, one I didn't really get to mention that much, but I'll still mention it because we need more subscribers, is the Cool Kids movie reviews. So you were saying before, like, oh, you watch just as much movies as I do. I don't think anybody watches as many movies as you do, but if I get close, that's the reason why, is the Cool Kids movie reviews. We review newly released movies, live shows on Saturdays at like 8 or 9, cool, depending. So it's me and my friends. We're just kind of shooting the shit, talking about the newest movie that came out, discussing, reviewing, all that stuff. So that's what's keeping me going to the theater, because sometimes I've just been like, I don't feel like going and leaving the house today. Yeah. But I'm, it's like, that's the thing that pushed me to like go watch more movies, was because of them. So
that's awesome. Yeah.
So go. And we're doing, on Saturday, we are reviewing Heretic, the movie with Hugh Grant, horror film. There you go. So stay tuned for that. I mean, probably once this is up, it'll be uploaded by then. But yeah, those are my 3 channels that I work on. Geek Informant is the main one. Cool Kids is like kind of a secondary thing. And then my quote unquote job is Oh So Curious. So I'm a busy boy.
Well, that's awesome.
But yeah.
Yeah, but it's great though. And clearly you are passionate about it, and it keeps you motivated. So I appreciate you sitting down. Like I said, you guys, I have been looking for someone to talk movies with, and it's so nice to get to see and talk to John on a pretty much weekly basis now. And we go off on our tangents, and we kind of just, run with what the conversation of the day. But
to the chagrin of many.
Yes, to the chagrin of many, exactly. But again, it's because they're not in the theater like we are. So again, check him out on YouTube on all of those various projects. It sounds like you've got a little bit of something for everybody, so that's really cool. And John, I appreciate you. I look forward to seeing you on our next YouTube chat. But you guys, this was Try Not to Curse. And thank you for joining us yet again.